Without further ado, I will introduce our panel of speakers. Claire Ferry is to my left, or will be to my left, and I'm sure she needs no introduction when she does arrive. To my right, we've got James Heaphy, who's done a lot of work in this space previously. He was elected Member of Parliament for Wales in 2015. To his right, we've got Sara Vaughan, who is the Director of Political and Regulatory Affairs at E.ON. And to Sara's right, we've got Victoria MacGregor, who is the Director of Energy at Citizens Advice. And finally, we've got Jillian Ambrose, who's a reporter at the Telegraph. So I'm going to start with James, if I may, and just get 5 minutes from you on your thoughts on this topic.
Thank you very much indeed. So I think that all of the discussion for too long around energy has been about how the current market doesn't work and capping prices and all of that. And I sort of agree with the sentiment. I signed John Penrose's letter, and it is true that not enough people are switching, too many people are paying over the odds for the tariff that they are on. E.ON deserve huge credit for what you announced last week.
Thank you,
with your standard variable tariff. But the fact is there's still too much of it. And so there's a sort of, to revert to the language of my previous job, there's a sort of close battle, which is how do you make the current market fair? And then there's the sort of deep battle of what are changes in energy meaning for an entirely new market that is possible, and how do you fairly fund the transition from the current system to the new system, from the current market to the new market, so that consumers and businesses get all of those benefits of a smart energy system and a smart energy market, having not had to pay too much to deliver that transition in the meantime. It's a very challenging space. I wanted to just sort of break my remarks down into sort of 4 areas. Firstly, the sort of arrival of the tech. Secondly, the preparedness of our energy system. Thirdly, some quick thoughts on what that means from a planning perspective. And then fourthly, the market. So I think that the game changer, the sort of people have heard me, I know people in this room have heard me sort of witter on about how EVs are the iPhone. And they are. The consumer experience in the new smart energy system is going to be the electric vehicle. Everything else is really wonkish and it's wires and switches and it's a bit boring. But the thing that will really transform the consumer's understanding of a smart energy system will be when they have to work out how their EV charges and how that's priced and how they can delay charging, and there'll just be an engagement. And traditionally in motoring, people have been willing to show that level of discretion. You know, you will drive past your nearest petrol station to the one just down the road because it's a penny a litre cheaper. So we're sort of used to being much more discerning in our purchasing of motoring than we are for energy in our homes. I don't understand why, but we are. And I think, therefore, EVs will be a big, big moment. But beyond that, as each of our fridges or TVs or whatever breaks or we feel like a new one, we go down to our local white goods store, and whether we choose to buy smart appliances or not, increasingly we are, because the functionality is increasingly coming as standard. So around us in our homes is being built this sort of smart environment that has clearly an IoT-enabled lifestyle advantage, but so too does it have potentially an energy advantage as well. Add that to the EVs, add that to a increasing understanding of the value of home energy efficiency measures, add that to an increasing enthusiasm for on-site generation for both businesses and domestic customers, add that to perhaps through particularly the white goods retailers, are we going to start seeing aggregated demand management for the private consumer and for the small business. And again, that's an entirely passive thing. It might just be that when you go to John Lewis and you buy your fridge, or to IKEA and you buy a dishwasher, you sign up and they have those goods on a sort of contract with you to release some of that energy back to the market across all their customer base in order to make. Who knows? I mean, there are people looking at that in those companies, and it's quite exciting, but it will be quite transformative, and it's sort of all just happening around people. So the tech, I think, is coming, and it will be the EVs that get people excited first. On the energy system, that's the sort of expensive bit, because the distribution networks need to transfer to becoming distribution systems that are capable of allowing flows of energy to go in both ways, and for balancing to happen initially in the home, and then between a cluster of houses, and then a town, and then a sort of county. And actually we end up with this position where National Grid are effectively dealing just in the sort of net flows of energy between each of the distribution systems. So you've got this sort of total reversal of the top-down Hinkley to toaster system that we have right now, and instead you have a sort of bottom-up solar panel, EV, hot water tank charging at a certain time of day, bottom-up self-balancing system. And we've got to get that right without costing the consumer huge amounts of money in the process, and selling that vision for what the saving will be once that system is in place is key to justifying the expense to get there. On planning, I've just got one point that I wanted to make, because it really irks me when I found this out down at Western Power Distribution's study day the other day. So my mailbag is full of people complaining about their poor broadband fibre connectivity. And a lot of them are living in houses that were built 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago. It was surely obvious 15 years ago that our aspiration should be fibre into every home, and yet we've only just started to require that to be the case. I find it amazing that we are still allowing new houses to be built with insufficient electrical connectivity to charge EVs at full charge. And I know that for parliamentarians in 10 years' time, the anger that you've bought your EV in your house and you cannot charge at full speed because you've not got the electrical bandwidth, for want of a better word, is nuts. So surely we should be legislating now for houses and small business or whatever to be built with that sort of bandwidth so that you can charge an EV. I wish Claire was here to hear that, but I'll tell her another time. So that's just, but there will be, she missed it just. I'm getting that. Well, so Claire, forgive me if I do that one more time, because it's important. Claire, I was just observing that when I was down with Western Power last week, we will get lots of letters about our broadband, and a lot of them come from people who live in houses that have been built very recently, and it's unforgivable that they weren't built with fibre to the premise. We should have legislated for it earlier. I think we should be legislating very soon. You may even tell us it's already going to happen, so that houses have to be built now with the electrical bandwidth to allow you to charge enough EVs to match the number of parking spaces the house has been built with. Because, as I understand it, a lot of houses right now are being built with fuse boxes and bandwidth that does not allow you to charge an EV at full speed. And that means we're not building future-proof homes, and we'll get a lot of mail about that in 10 years' time when people find their EV isn't properly working. The final point I wanted to make, that was my one planning point, and then the market. If we're going to realise this sort of tech-enabled, smart, decentralised, digitised energy system that empowers the consumer, allows them to trade in the market where they can sell the energy they've brought back. Maybe they plug their car in at work and they've got a free charge. That's what Facebook do in Palo Alto for their staff. If you plug it in, you get a free charge, and then you're physically driving the energy back to where you need it in the evening. But if consumers are going to become this part of the market where they can sell their energy back in the early evening peak, then they charge their car when it's cheapest overnight, they're warming their water in the same way, and Alexa is running their home. That is ultimately where I hope that this will all go. And it's all being done by algorithm, and if Alexa's rubbish, we can sack her and employ Siri instead, but we don't need to any longer consciously switch. It's all being done by algorithm for us by the big data companies. We need to create a market that settles at the very least every half hour, but I would argue even more quickly than that, so you can have that sort of thing. My final question, I guess, to the audience and maybe to E.ON is, we love to beat up the big six, but there's quite a big regulatory challenge if all of a sudden the big six are replaced by Amazon, Apple and Google. Yep. Discuss.
Thank you very much. Welcome to Claire, Harry as well, for joining us. If you're ready to go.
I will, and I'm sorry for being late. I've been running around back to back, and I recognise many people here. We've heard it all before over the last couple of days, and I picked up on James's point. So I think what's so fascinating about consumers, and we started having this conversation last night along with Laura Sandys, was consumers are not a one-size-fits-all proposition. So if you look at the granularity with which supermarkets treat us or our mobile phone companies, we don't, Tesco's doesn't say, right, we're all the same and therefore we all want the same things and we want the same deals. They know that they can increase our economic value by serving us better, by working out our needs and preferences. And it's the same a little bit with energy consumers, that as with any technology, there is an adoption curve, right? So I had an owl do anyone remember the owls back in 2006? It was the first sort of smart meter, and you plugged it into your supply, and it was absolutely brilliant. So you went off switching things on and off, and you actually took back control of your energy supply. But then the batteries ran out, and I got a bit busy, and and I got a bit bored, and so I sort of stopped. So of course there will always be consumers who have that great interest in understanding their consumption patterns and wanting to control them, but there will be others who can't do that, and there is a huge question about vulnerable consumers and consumers who simply cannot deal with that technology. And I know we've got CAB on the panel, and we spend about £1 million a year of taxpayers' money helping the most vulnerable consumers to understand their options. And then there are a whole group of people in the middle for whom there are lots of choices, and for too long I think we've made the decision all about switching. I mean, we talked about this last night. We've been talking about switching as a way of extracting value from your energy provider for a good 10 years now, it seems, and some people do that with regularity, and others just think it's a huge pain and want legislated tariffs, and others don't want to think about energy at all because it's just one of those things. You just want your home to be warm and secure, and energy efficient and low cost to run. And so there is this sort of world of consumer options out there, and I am excited about the technological opportunities because they enable us to be any one of those consumers. As we do with our shopping patterns or our web habits, we can take control of them and manage them very carefully, or we can let somebody else do it for us and perhaps complain a little bit about it or indeed enjoy it. And as James said, that does then posit huge regulatory challenges. With my former hat on, when I worked a lot in trying to improve the safety of children online, it was fascinating to me that there were a huge cadre of people who complained bitterly at the idea of opt-in settings for adult content, because somehow this would give the government and businesses power to know what you were doing. And I used to say, but Google knows every keystroke that you input. That's why these adverts for bizarre shopping things follow you around. I mean, you are willing, it seems, to give your entire private life over to a private corporation, by the way, domiciled in a country who has very different regulatory structure, and yet somehow you're not prepared to do this. And by the way, government would never see what you do. This is between you and your ISP. Anyway, so I think there are enormous opportunities, and I think that the challenge really for the energy companies is to think a little bit more about that consumer granularity, and also to remember that consumers will also be providers. So if we get our distributed energy revolution going, when you'll see the investment we're doing with that, there will be some of us who are actually generating, and by the way, we may not be providing to the grid. We may be providing to friends and relatives, and there are some really interesting energy sharing networks forming now. And so there is an opportunity really through digitisation and understanding our energy flows to create some entirely new market opportunities and indeed consumer opportunities.
Fantastic, thank you. Very, very, very insightful. Sara, I'll turn to you, and just the rest of it I'll work down after.
It's quite nice speaking third, because then you can agree with a lot of what the others have said. I agree very strongly with Claire's point about there isn't a one-size-fits-all. And that's certainly something that we've very much recognised at E.ON. And so what we're trying to move to is a much more personalised approach to dealing with our customers, because there are some who want to engage fully in the market, there are some who want to go ahead and generate their own electricity, but there are many others who are happy just to receive energy and to save energy with our help. I also, James, liked your point about near and far. So there's today's market and there's the market that might develop in the future. I think what we are seeing already is much more engagement from customers. Customers are voting with their feet, and they cannot be taken for granted. So already in 2017, despite what you say, 3.5 million customers have switched supplier, and that's already more than switched in 2014. If we look back at 2016, 1 in 3 of those who switched had never switched before. They were first-time switchers. And you also have to look at the fact that people aren't just switching to other suppliers, they're also switching within supplier. So Ofgem has noted that over 1 million customers have come off SVT in the last 6 months. And for E.ON ourselves, we've noticed that 500,000 customers who were, if you like, habitual SVT customers have actually come off since 2016. So we are beginning to see that change in the market, and it's happening in B2B as well. Churn is increasing, customers are becoming more engaged with the market, and that means that as supply companies, we really have to work harder to keep our customers happy. Now, we are a supply company. James used the phrase that I have banned within E.ON. The first word is big, and I'm not saying the second one. But I will make it very clear that we absolutely do not consider ourselves as being one of those. We have changed. It's not just words. We've sort of put our money where our mouth is. So we split our company in half. We have spun off all of the conventional generation and the trading business, and it's now in a new company called Uniper, which is actually the subject of a public offer at the moment. And E.ON itself is a supply business with some renewables. That's all we are. We actually had to set up a trading business from scratch over the last year. So it might be going a bit too far to say we're like a very large new entrant, but it's not very far off that. Why have we done that? It's about wanting to focus on what this debate is all about. So the customer solutions, the new world of energy, the energy that is local, that is decentralised, that is community energy, the solutions for customers like PV and battery, like being able to pull energy down off a solar cloud, like working in a community energy situation. We've already got over 22,000 customers on community energy schemes across 58 sites. So we're already engaging with this new world of energy. And of course, what that also leads to is things like electric vehicles, where at the moment we're actually more advanced in Europe, but we're bringing our learnings and our technology over here. I think the other thing that's quite interesting that we've seen, and this goes to the regulation point, is I think there's a bit of flip-flopping that happens in regulation. If I think back, and I've probably been doing this for far too long, but if I think back to when the market opened, it was all about innovation, it was all about new tariffs, it was all about what can you offer your customer. And then suddenly it was, well, no, you have to have 4 tariffs and no more than 4 tariffs, and the tariffs all have to look the same, and we ended up in a very sort of plain vanilla world. And the idea was that that would lead to greater engagement of customers. Actually, it didn't. What we ended up with is more customers on standard variable tariff. But the shackles have been thrown off, they've been broken, and the companies are responding to that. So if I look just at our own company, we've managed in the last couple of months to launch a cap and track tariff. So it's capped, it never goes higher than the price it's issued at, but it then tracks a basket of tariffs in the market. So it falls as those tariffs fall. We've got a 100% renewables tariff, so a clean tariff. We've got, we're trialling a tariff that is a reassurance tariff for customers with a single price, no matter how much energy they use. We've got a tariff for electric vehicles to try to encourage people who are these early adopters that James talked about to charge their vehicles in the most cost-efficient manner. Similarly, in the business market, we have many business customers that we're working with who we have helped them put their own generation on site. We have helped them, if they don't want to have their own generation, to actually create virtual power plants so that they're making money from the energy that they don't use, where they turn down their demand. So there's a lot that we're doing out there to seek to engage with our customers and to bring them into this new world, this brave new world. But I think I'd come back to the customer just to finish. It really isn't a one-size-fits-all market. There are some customers out there who don't want a revolution. They might be prepared to accept an evolution from the situation where we are now, but we can all talk about it. But for some people, either they're not interested, or it's all too frightening, or they just don't want to do it. So I think we need to make sure that wherever we go to, those customers are not disadvantaged, and that we continue to work with all customers, whether they're out there at the cutting edge or whether they are happy to carry on doing what they're doing with a good deal. And thank you, James, for the credit you gave us for making the first move in the industry on moving away from SVT. I did get sent a sort of thing from our media people suggesting that Centrica might be hinting that they're going to follow our lead. But let's wait and see what happens. Thank you.
Thank you, Sara. Victoria.
Thank you. So, in case you don't know, Citizens Advice, as well as being an advice charity that provides face-to-face and telephone advice from 2,700 locations in England and Wales, we are also the statutory consumer advocate for energy customers. So we help people solve the problems they experience as energy customers. And actually, in one way or another, 3,000 people seek our help on energy every single day. In fact, the only thing we get more consumer calls about are generally second-hand cars and builders. So, but an important part of our work is also at looking ahead to understand how changes in the future might affect consumers. So, as we've heard, the energy system is undergoing an unprecedented revolution in how electricity is generated, stored and consumed. But in our view, those opportunities from this change won't be maximised unless we put consumers at the very heart of them. And that means being realistic about what consumers want, how they actually behave, and of course how they should be protected. I want to talk about three major challenges and opportunities. Firstly, new price plans that will be made available after the rollout of smart meters. Secondly, prospects for distributed generation. And thirdly, again, about consumer protection. In terms of smart meters, the biggest quantifiable benefits of the smart meter rollout are, of course, the ones that people might consider the most boring. Increasing the chances you get an accurate bill and eliminating the need to give meter readings. Not the most exciting stuff, but will drastically improve the consumer experience and reduce complaints. And on average, a third of the complaints that we receive are about billing issues. So it does have the potential to significantly enhance people's day-to-day experience of their energy. And another thing that we know that smart meters will do, because we've seen it in other countries, is facilitate new time of use tariffs, where suppliers can vary the price they charge in order to meet the needs of the system. This could offset the need for extra generation, and it could help reduce demand on the grid at its peak. But, and there is a but, aspirations for these pricing plans can quickly run into the reality of actually how consumers behave. And it turns out that consumers most of the time don't actually want to spend time thinking about their energy consumption, and they actually won't change their behaviour a great deal of their own volition. We recently did some research into time of use tariffs, and actually we found that there was more interest in adopting these tariffs than you might have expected. But if the smart home technology wasn't available, the total benefits to the energy system were only going to be about £20 million a year. That does change, though, if the technology keeps up. If we electrify vehicles and heating and we automate the home, then the benefits go up to somewhere in the region of £272 million per annum. And the reason the benefit grows is because that follows the grain of consumer behaviour. If the smart home can do the consumption adjustments for them, then the benefits become much larger. One of the big opportunities for consumers is around distributed generation, as we've been hearing, generating their own electricity and exporting to the grid when they're not using it, and throw electric car storage into the mix. And we've seen some interesting announcement from OVO in the last day or so, and you're getting a generation profile that looks really quite radically different to what we see today. At the moment, we know it's relatively wealthy prosumers who are buying into this rooftop revolution, you might call it, and that's a good thing that they are for now, but we do need to keep an eye on how we pay for our energy infrastructure because of the way we pay for energy networks. These consumers are able to avoid paying part of the cost of the network, and the rest of the consumer base is paying for it. And that's not a huge problem at the moment, but it could be if rooftop solar takes off and fewer consumers are paying for the energy networks. And this could be a particularly challenging problem for vulnerable customers who are going to be at the tail end of adopting these technologies. So we have seen this happen in Australia. So we don't think the problems are insurmountable, but we do need to think carefully about adjusting the rules and regulations before this does become a problem. And lastly, in terms of getting consumer protection right, there are lots and lots of opportunities, and the prizes are huge. I think Imperial College estimated the benefits to be between 17 and 40 billion from a more flexible system. And obviously Ofgem and BEIS have set out a comprehensive plan for how we get there, and the plan is admirable in very many ways. But there is a big gap in our view in the thinking about how consumers are protected. We can't assume that the existing framework will work in a new context, and although it's true we can't know exactly what this new world is going to look like, we shouldn't wait until the problems occur to think about how we might fix them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Finally, Jillian.
Yes, finally. I know it's a big panel, so I won't take up too much time, but I mean, it took me about 2 seconds to agree to be on this panel today, because I mean, just the subject line, that's not the word, but taking back control of energy in a consumer context is, it's just so engaging right now. I think in terms of the energy industry, it's one of those tipping points which I think could really overhaul all the many problems that we've seen in the last few years. I've been writing about energy for about 7 years, and it was about 5 years ago I was a market reporter writing about fluctuating energy prices, and we were seeing very low prices for summer, and it was being driven by record low summer demand. Now, at the time, I was working for a company called Platts, and we only really wrote about energy industry stuff when it was big. You know, a huge coal plant outage, a massive new gas plant being built. We were, sort of big picture people. When we drilled down into why we were hitting these record lows in summer, it turned out that it was rooftop solar panels. Yep. That is not what we were writing about at Platts, but that is exactly what was moving the entire market. And that was 5 years ago. So I've been waiting patiently for this tipping point to come, because it was immediately obvious that this cumulative effect is really big news for the market. And I think it's that gravity is the same in terms of the retail market, in terms of how we view the entire system. So, in short, very happy to be here today. I think the two things that I think are most exciting and bring the most exciting change to the energy market, as I view it through the lens of reporting on it, is that it brings the opportunity for innovation and differentiation. So innovation in terms of the offerings, we've heard a lot about those that are on offer today, and things that might be coming through in the future. We're always hearing about really innovative stuff, and differentiation, as discussed before as well. Energy can stop being this homogenous commodity that people just expect. It's a sort of given right in the UK to be living in a house that has electricity. That's not something special. That's not something you get excited about. But all of these offerings and all of this change means that it won't be about energy molecules anymore. It'll be about a total offering that's coming through. And that's really exciting, because then with differentiation comes real engagement from the consumer, first of all, but also competition. because not everyone's going to be offering the same thing. So, a lot of the energy industry bugbears could effectively be taken care of by this huge move back to the consumer. In terms of pitfalls, we've heard a bit about the physical issues around networks. I think those are really important. But I think the thing that, when I'm speaking to people in the industry about these new offerings and these new moves into new markets, I think the thing that always strikes me is that the companies are thinking like companies. And we've heard a bit about thinking from a consumer point of view, but I think it can actually go even further than that, because, as we were talking about the smart meters and the estimated billing plug and saying, this is a really good thing because it'll stop your bills being wrong. Granted, it is a huge issue. It is, one of the biggest areas of complaint. But how inspiring is it to tell someone, we're going to remove the blunder you should never have had to put up with in the first place? That's not exciting. No one's going to get excited about that. And the other problem with that is that as soon as there is a glitch, and with any massive tech rollout, and smart meters is proven to be glitchy at best, I think, there will be problems. So if your big selling point is now there won't be problems, and there is a problem, then you have a problem, basically. It's not the way to go about things. So I would be very excited to see more explaining the potential of smart meters, and not what it'll mean for you in the first month, but sort of actually paint a vision of the energy system of the future and how you're going to tap into that. Maybe that'll just take time, but in the meantime, you'll continue to see articles in the Telegraph telling you why not to get a smart meter. I didn't write it. But they are written, and this is why, because if you aren't talking about why you should, all you're left with is the many reasons why you shouldn't. I think communication is really important in that point of view. And another anecdote, if you'll indulge me, I was chatting to someone, and I won't go into too much detail because I don't want to out them, but it was a fantastic innovation. It was all about smart and about looking at energy data in your home to be able to tell more about you. So data is a very touchy thing. And I think companies can be really excited about what we can do with your data, that you forget that this is something deeply private and deeply personal. The example that was given to me was saying, if this company is partnered with a delivery service, so you're getting your online shopping delivered, they can tell from your energy usage whether or not you're in your house. Cannot think of anything more terrifying than some delivery guy knowing whether or not I'm at home and how many people might be at home. And it was deeply unsettling, and the lovely chap I was speaking to couldn't really fathom what I was worried about.
Oh, that's scary.
Because it's just exciting from a technological point of view that you're able to do that. And all the conveniences you can add to the customer experience is fantastic. But I do think we need to tread carefully with this sort of thing. I need to tread carefully whenever I pitch anything to my editors on how we phrase things. And the same goes for when you're dealing with a customer. So I would be cognizant of that. And also, as we were talking earlier, there are different kinds of customers. So there are going to be people who just don't want this. Plenty of people. And if you would like to see some of those people or get a flavour for their thoughts, the comments section of the Telegraph is wide open. It's filled with the kind of useful gems that could really put things into perspective. I don't take the comments too seriously all the time, so neither should you. But they are there, and it does show there are very varying opinions on this. The other pitfall, potentially, I think, is regulation. From Ofgem, I think the points made earlier about the legacy of regulatory moves from Ofgem is not great, and I do think that tariff cap phase was very much about creating this vanilla market where there wasn't differentiation, and so there wasn't innovation, so there wasn't engagement, so there wasn't competition. Yeah. That's what it comes down to. So I think Ofgem is on the right track in terms of their move towards principle-based regulation rather than hard and fast, stifling rules. But I do think that there are unintended consequences with that too. So there will continue to be problems and niggles, and as with all things regulatory, they'll need to be smoothed out as things unfold and as things develop. But there should be, from the outset, a flexibility in terms of how these things are managed. I think that is where Ofgem is at the moment, so that is a good thing. And yeah, I'm very excited to see what more comes from industry as a result of all these changes.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Jillian. I'm conscious we've only got 20 minutes left, so I'm going to go straight to audience questions. I'm hopeful that the panelists' comments will stimulate something from you guys. So I'll take the gentleman on the left here first. If you could just state your name and organisation, please, and make sure it's a question and,
sure.
and not a statement.
Charlie Macon from Good Energy, the renewable energy supplier. We had a great chat last night, Claire, about future and smart and flexibility and consumers, and we decided that there's myriad policy levers and industry levers, and there's no one thing to get us there. You also mentioned, Sara, about the different types of consumer and some not being engaged. I just wonder, bringing it right back to this question, are we ready? Who's we? And if you could maybe talk to that, that'd be great. Thanks.
Thank you.
Well, I would also try and define ready. So this is a problem. I'm sounding like Bill Clinton here. No, I'm not. But so I think it's a really important question. And it gets back a bit to the sort of, I think, which Jim mentioned, the rollout of smart meters. That it fascinates me that, and particularly in this space where we feel we need to know the future and then work back and think about what policy levers we need to, or regulatory levers we need to get there. I mean, the point is we don't know the future in this area. There are so many unintended avenues that people could go down. And I was fascinated in what Victoria was saying about the rooftop solar sort of issue. So I think what we need to do is almost sort of set the framework with what do we know we want to do? Well, we know we want to get people's energy consumption down in the home, and that can be achieved through a variety of regulatory measures around building regs and communication measures and giving people more control over their energy, some of whom will want to take control and others who won't. And so if we just set that as the objective and set ourselves relatively short-term targets and make sure that the levers are in place and that the industry is being either incentivised or otherwise persuaded to be involved. But I am sort of slightly fascinated in this space because in the broader space, if you look at what has happened, and we talked last night about the price of renewables and also the fact that energy bills, and Jillian, thank you very much for running the story, that it is, if you look at the facts, consumer energy bills in total have gone down over the last 5 years. And so whilst there has been an element of policy cost increase, and there is a question about how long you keep that, and thank you, E.ON, for your suggestion on how to do these things, the energy efficiency measures that have come alongside this focus have driven down consumer bills. And we have the review, the Helm review, going on to look at industry energy bills. But that is not a fact that we know or talk about very often, even though it is a fact. And so I think but what we want to do is get that down further. So I think sort of slightly setting that short-term objective and then making sure we are all collectively aligned for that. But also, what I've heard very strongly is these things bleed across different classic divisions of sector. So what is government policy? What is the energy industry? Who is the energy industry, and who are the new entrants? And I think we have to be prepared to adapt really rapidly to the changes. And that is not something government's good at doing. And we get criticised for changing regulatory frameworks. So if we set a feed-in tariff, and it is apparent that people are using that feed-in tariff for very substantial excess return, which it was never designed for, and it is not stimulating the kind of small-scale changes we want, then I think it's right to change the policy. And I accept that this is difficult sometimes, but this is a really, really fast-moving area, quite rightly, and the feeling of sort of tipping point, I think, is absolutely there. I'm sorry, it's not a very good answer. We is all of us. We don't know what the future is, but let's just get through the next few years. And, and if we set ourselves a target that, let's get down people's cost of energy or consumption of energy by another 10%. I don't know, I'm making it up, but collective ambition.
Thank you, Claire. Anyone else on the panel wish to add anything further?
Well, it only depends on your sort of timescales. You probably want to get more questions in.
No, go for it.
I mean, I think I think it's a good question. What is the we? One of the things that I think we've seen over the years with this industry is that things tend to start at the sort of the big end of the scale, with the large industrial customers, then the smaller industrial customers, and then down through the sort of the SMEs to the domestic consumer, and that gives more confidence with the changes that are coming through. I mean, I think for ourselves as an energy company operating in the market, probably our recognition was no, we weren't ready, and that's why we needed to make that fundamental change. Because we saw ourselves as, on the one hand, we were an engineering organisation, which was all about running as efficiently as possible, dealing with large long-term assets and taking decisions over many, many years. On the other hand, you'd got the sort of the digital revolution. You'd got customers making choices and things that needed to be, decisions made just like that. And the two didn't really add up. That's why we split ourselves in two, because we realised we couldn't carry on trying to ride both horses or play both basketball and netball on the same court. Probably not quite that. You know what I mean.
Can I be hyper-literal about this question? Shall we do a show of hands on who has a smart meter?
My favourite question. You've stolen it, Jillian. It's so unfair. You've got installed smart meters. Wow, that's the highest number I've ever seen in an audience. Who's been offered one? I've switched, and therefore you don't get. It's much more difficult to get them when you've switched, is what I'm finding, which is something I didn't realise when I switched.
I think it depends. It depends who you switch to. I should just say, because I'm embarrassed, I have no reception at my home, so I'm waiting for the DCC. They arrived to fit it, but unfortunately it didn't work. Hopefully, I mean, SMET's one at the moment. There is interoperability between certain companies, but once the DCC is up and running, and we are all sort of crossing our fingers and holding our breath and everything else to hope that that's very soon, then there will absolutely be interoperability, and switching however many times you want to do it will not be a problem.
Thank you. The gentleman there on the right-hand side.
Thank you very much. I'm Bruce Smith and I'm the Energy Ombudsman. Can I just say, I don't have a smart meter. I'd really welcome what you said, James, because I live in a brand new flat that was completed last year. We've been told there's no chance we'll ever have smart meters in them because it's not been designed for smart meters. We all have a parking place for cars, nowhere to plug in an electric car, and probably never will be. So please, can I urge you to continue your campaign to make sure the planning laws change?
The campaign started here.
Campaign started. It's good to see it starting. I've enjoyed the debate today because it is a very forward-looking one. I usually go to things that talk about smart meters and switching and engagement and so on. I think today you've actually all managed to move this debate forward. And the talk of an energy revolution is actually very exciting. It's a revolution which is both global and individual, and one I think it changes the whole nature of the way we use particularly electricity. Within all that, I'm an ombudsman. How do we make sure in this new world, within this revolutionary new structure, people are protected and have access to redress in the proper way?
Thank you. Victoria, I'll go to you.
Yeah, well, I think there's a few things that we could do, and we've been proposing that as we move towards this new system, we should be trialling and promoting policymakers and regulators the most consumer-friendly options that we can. So, for example, we would really like to see a UK-wide trial of critical peak rebate tariffs, which essentially means you don't get penalised if you don't reduce your consumption, but you get some money back if you do at the time that they want you to. So we think there's opportunities through trialling things to enhance our knowledge and prepare ourselves to understand what the pitfalls might be so that we can make sure we do protect consumers. We do also think that actually initially it will be quite important that there's sort of no-lose options for consumers in this sort of environment, so no penalty fees for cancelling, at least in the early days on new sorts of tariffs and products would be one way to make sure that people really understand and are choosing options that will benefit them. But it is going to be a challenge, and Jillian mentioned principles-based regulation, as you know well. It's difficult to, we're all facing the challenge of how we monitor how companies perform in a principles-based world. So there's lots and lots of thinking to do to establish that.
Fantastic.
And I just, I think the role of the regulator and the understanding at the regulatory level of the importance of consumers is absolutely vital. And obviously we're going through a conversation at the moment with the regulator around tariff setting. I find it fascinating because I was the Minister for Rail for a couple of years, and it was, it could be said that the original model for privatisation focus far more on who was the guardian of the assets and the pipelines and not the protector and provider of consumer services. And so the long-term battle in the rail sector has been to make customers count, and I think we are getting there, and Chris Grayling's doing a great job. And it's very good to hear what Ian has said about the recognition of the importance of consumer protections and opportunities within the energy sector. But in a way, we're moving much faster than trains, because energy is a distributed item, unlike rail network, and so there is an opportunity for consumer empowerment. But the critical role, if we believe in free market and private sector investment, which I do, the critical role of regulator to demonstrate that it is on the side of consumers as well as an economic regulator of an asset, I think is absolutely vital. And can I just, shout out, I think the Systems Advice Bureau are just amazing. And Victoria, they are so lucky to have you. And one of the fascinating things in government is, whether it's CAB or which, do not underestimate the power of these organisations to come to politicians and just say, you got it wrong and you've got to change. And we are so appreciative of the work you do, as I'm sure your visitors are on a daily basis.
Thank you, Claire. I will take a question for the gentleman here.
Thank you. Mark Bygraves, Elexon. James, I was delighted with your comment about the importance of half-hourly settlement, because Elexon is leading on behalf of Ofgem the design of half-hourly settlement. But that is only one element. We've already talked about smart meters and the fact that we've got to address, as an industry, disengaged customers. Then there's the whole faster switching initiative that's being introduced, as well as regulations coming out of Europe and the whole EVs issue. So an enormous amount going on. Now, in my experience, this industry is very good when it has a clear destination, a clear direction, it rolls in behind and delivers. Alternatively, when it's given 10 years, 5 years to think about something, it'll take those 5 years. So my question is there sufficient clarity of destination, of that objective, of that direction being set by government, by the regulator, to enable industry to then roll in behind and deliver this consumer energy revolution?
Thank you very much. Sara?
I think we're getting some mixed signals at the moment, actually. I remember I went along to Birmingham University for a big launch by Greg Clark on his Faraday challenge around batteries, and effectively it was around distributed energy, and it was all very, very exciting, and had a great opportunity to chat to a number of people who were very enthused by it. The same day, though, BEIS put out a consultation document on derating batteries in the capacity mechanism, which therefore runs a coach and horses through the business case. We've had a recent example as well with the medium combustion plant directive, and a bit of a sort of difference of views between Defra and BEIS, so far as I can see it. So I believe that there is a destination. I think that we are all trying to get there, but I think we have to accept that along the way there are going to be bumps in the road, and it's whether we can get back onto the road. If I'm really honest, and I say this having said it as we have changed, there's quite a lot of resistance from the incumbent generators to any of this change, and that's what we're up against. So I think, as this brave new entrant with a lot of customers, I think we need to carry on pushing it through.
Thank you. James?
I think it's really interesting that Claire and Greg are all over this. I think
you think?
Absolutely. No. And what's interesting is just sort of doing all the meetings that I do with industry. It's amazing unless you're being nice because I'm on their side, how much you recognise that they get this too. There are, and I think Claire's sort of saying, look, let's set ourselves some sort of tangible short, medium-term targets, because that will mean we're making sensible policy decisions that are having immediate impact, is really the right approach. There are things, though, that I think are very obviously going to be required in our new energy system and in the new energy market that we can absolutely future-proof against now. Are the smart meters that are going into houses going to be capable of facilitating the sort of trading of energy back out of a house as well as coming back in? And if they're not, and we absolutely know that we're going to need a switch like that in a property to facilitate that sort of energy market, why on earth aren't we stopping the rollout of the current smart meters and making sure that one is rolled out that will deliver that? Because isn't it nuts that we might be denying a functionality that we know we're going to need and we're not prepared for it?
But on that basis, you'd never buy an iPhone.
Well,
I mean, there is an argument that says you don't let James, you and I rarely disagree, but letting the perfect be the enemy of the good, particularly if you're trying to drive a different form of behaviour.
That's what I'm saying.
And in the same way as with an iPhone, you can upgrade SMETS 1s over the air and turn them into SMETS 2s, and then it'll be fine, effectively a SMETS.
But there is a communication problem. Because people say, well, why would I wait if you're going to bring it out? So sorry, James. I don't accept
that is the same thing. I mean, I think that's a bit like saying that on my very first Nokia, when text messaging was really sort of irrelevant, that we should have just had numbers on a phone. That was all that was required. It was obvious that there was going to be quite a lot of typing and words that were going to phones, and so sort of built in that functionality. We had no idea where it would go. It's just an instinct. We knew that was likely to be a thing. And I just think we need to be making sure that things that we're spending public cash on are absolutely future-proof and are going to deliver that. Similarly, I just think we have to sort of understand what the impact of the IoT is going to be. Is the IoT going to overtake much of the functionality that we've expected from smart meters in terms of providing the sensors? When that is happening, all of that data that is being gathered by that, Jillian's point about privacy is bang on. That data is of huge value. But is that now an Ofgem issue, or is that an Ofcom issue? And what's the sort of regulatory burden for understanding how all of that IoT delivered data that may be energy or TV viewing or whatever is going to be? There's just things that I think we can sort of start tackling. The ministers are all over it, and they know infinitely more than I do. But there are sort of certain things that we might know that are going to happen, and that we should just make sure that we're making sure that they are going to deliver the functionality that people will expect in due course.
Thank you. I'm glad to see we're stimulating some debate on the panel. We've only got 5 minutes left, so I'm going to take a cluster of questions. The gentleman who's had his hand up for a while, I'm sorry. And then if there's anyone else, the lady here, anybody else? I'll take Nina. And Nina over there. I'll take those three. Thank you.
Trevor Hutchings from GemServe. On this point about destination, the government statutory advisors on climate change would say for the built environment it's zero net carbon for the built environment over the next decade. And a lot of what we've heard about is the need to engage consumers, but some consumers will not engage. How does the panel think we're going to get there, particularly with those households that aren't interested?
Thank you.
I'm Helen Bray from SGN, the Gas Networks Company. So I was just going to ask whether we think consumers are ready for a revolution in gas. Talked a lot about electricity.
Thank you.
Good question.
Nina Skrutzka, REA. I'm just going to add on to that question because you stole my question about zero carbon homes. So a little bit about what you were saying. Why would we build a house now that we know has got to serve a 50-year, 100-year purpose? And if it's not fit for purpose, how can we make sure we change that as quickly as possible? Zero carbon homes.
Thank you. We have 2 minutes, so I'm going to take a very quick answers. So just in summary, how do we engage customers that are less engaged? Are we ready for a gas revolution? How do we future-proof homes that they're adaptable for the future? if anyone has got any.
Well, so I'll start with gas. I think gas is absolutely part of the mix going forward, and there's lots of innovation around the gas grid, as you know, with discussions, and indeed we're funding some of the trials around hydrogen, around different methods and distribution mechanisms, and this is part of why I said yesterday I think fracking done sensibly is part of the mix, because the long-term future for our diverse energy supply absolutely has gas as part of it. So I think that's absolutely right. Nina, we've debated zero carbon homes. Look, I think the thing for me, and it slightly gets back to Trevor's point, is what is the measure that we are trying to get to? And for me, and this is another little sneak preview of something I might be talking about very soon, is if we believe in clean growth, then the measure is for every pound of GDP we generate, we drop our emissions. And by the way, that is something where we have led the world. So be really proud when you leave here that thanks to many of the people in this room and your lobbying and campaigning activities, Britain has led the world in terms of the pace of decarbonisation and the rate of economic growth. It's a brilliant success story, but we want that to go faster because we have to in order to meet our emissions targets and also to capture the economic opportunity. And it slightly gets to the zero home, because I was not around, I wasn't in post for the zero homes debate, Nina, you'll know far more than me. But there are many pathways to choose, and I think what we've seen in the renewables market over the last couple of years is how you can have unprecedented movements that suddenly mean you should be thinking about policy in a slightly different way, because you suddenly have a very different pathway to achieve what we want to achieve. And homes are about 13% of emissions if you strip out the energy component. They're difficult to reach, back to this point about consumer behaviour, and you'll see we'll be bringing forward some ideas. The real big challenges, the two challenges we've got to try and solve, because they're about 28 and 22% of emissions, are business energy efficiency, which is a real problem, and transport. And you can see we're making progress on transport. And sadly, the conversation we were having last night was, well, what's the magic bullet? And I said, I wish there was one. There isn't. There is grinding forward on a series of policy fronts right across the economy, with a joined-up government, and hopefully, with integrated corporate partners, to just deliver something that we know we need to get to. And some consumers will be totally up for that and will be biting my hand off for anything I want to give them. Others will not necessarily know it's happening, because they'll be delivering in I'm so sorry to hear about your experiences in your new home. That's just ridiculous that we are building homes that are simply not technology proofed. And you'll be pleased in the digital economy bill, any development over 30 properties now has to have a high-speed broadband pipe provider, which is helpful. But we know we need to do more. I will say one thing about new building regs. We have to be mindful about Grenfell. So there are clearly some real challenges about the whole world of building regulation and indeed the enforcement of building regs. And I am not going to do anything in my policy area that means we don't have a full and proper inquiry as to what happened there. We have to be joined up if we're going to make a difference.
Thank you. Sorry, Nina. Can I just take...
Yes. The long-term operating cost is lower, and that needs to be baked into the mix.
Sorry, can I just take this gentleman's question about engaging consumers, if anyone's got a...
Well, I think I mentioned it briefly. I think the important thing is to design things around the way that consumers actually behave, not the way we think they will behave, because that's the most that's the best way to ensure that products, services, whatever it is, actually bring benefit to consumers. I would like to make a point on the data as well. I think that really is a very, very crucial area, because if you really want people to engage, they need to have trust. We had a little bit of discussion about data, and that is a real area where people could lose trust very, very quickly. So I think it's important we get that right from the outset.
Thank you. I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. So I want to say a massive thank you to all our panellists, and a massive thank you to E.ON for supporting this event. Thank you.